Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the smoky, straw-scented hush of a Viking longhouse, just after the wedding feast is ended. You're lying on a rough wool blanket, your body sore from dancing, drinking, and trying not to trip over someone's uncle during the sword blessing. The fire's embers are still glowing, and outside, the wind howls like it's auditioning for a saga. But inside, it's quiet. Too quiet. Because the real test of your marriage begins now. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the sound of footsteps. Not soft, sneaky ones. These are deliberate, heavy. The kind that say, "We're here to check your sheets." Because in Viking society, the morning after a wedding wasn't private. It was proof. The blood check ritual was a communal affair, and yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. Elders, often female relatives, inspect the linen for signs that the marriage was consummated. No pressure. You sit up groggily, blinking at the flickering light. The longhouse smells of smoke, sweat, and roasted goat. Your new spouse is beside you, equally dazed. You both know what's coming. A woman, maybe your aunt, maybe hers, lifts the sheet with the solemnity of a priest. If there's blood, it's a good omen. If not, well, historians still argue whether the absence meant shame, suspicion, or just a second chance to try again before breakfast. The sheet isn't just about intimacy, it's about alliance. Viking marriages were practical unions between families, not just individuals. That stain, or lack thereof, could affect dowry negotiations, inheritance claims, and even local gossip rankings. You're not just a couple, you're a contract. And speaking of contracts, someone's already counting goats. The dowry and bride price exchange happened before the wedding, but now it's time to confirm that everything arrived as promised. You hear muttering in the corner, someone's tallying silver bracelets, wool bolts, and a suspiciously underfed sheep. You try not to laugh, but the tension is real. If anything's missing, it could spark a feud, or worse, a poem. Because in Viking culture, poetic insults were a weapon. If your in-laws are unhappy, they won't yell. They'll compose a verse about your stinginess and recite it at the next feast. And trust me, once your stingy sheep verse goes viral in the fjord, there's no coming back. You glance around the longhouse. It's packed. Multiple generations live here, grandparents, cousins, toddlers with sticky fingers. Privacy? Not a thing. You're expected to be visible, functional, and appropriately affectionate. Not too much, though. A lingering kiss might earn a smirk. A cold shoulder? A whispered concern about your fertility. And yes, fertility matters. A lot. The blood on the sheet isn't just proof of consummation. It's a hopeful sign of future heirs. Children mean labor, legacy, and leverage. You're already being watched for signs of pregnancy, even if you're still digesting last night's mead. The fire crackles. Someone hands you a bowl of porridge. It's lumpy, but warm. You eat in silence, aware that every bite, glance, and sigh is being interpreted. Did you serve your spouse first? Did you smile? Did you look tired? These tiny details feed the community's understanding of your bond, and the community is always watching. A fringe tidbit. In some regions, newlyweds were expected to sleep with a symbolic sword between them on the first night. Not for safety, though that's a bonus, but to represent the transition from singlehood to shared duty. You didn't just marry a person, you married their ancestors, their debts, and their weird cousin who keeps asking if you've named your future cow yet. You finish your porridge. The sheet has been folded and tucked away, either as a proud relic or a quiet secret. The elders nod, the goats bleat, and you, well, you're officially married. But don't get too comfortable. The chores start in 10 minutes. You barely finish your porridge before someone claps their hands and announces it's time to see what kind of spouse you really are. Welcome to the Viking breakfast gauntlet. Equal parts political theater, economic audit, and passive-aggressive family reunion. You stand up, still sore from the wedding feast, and shuffle toward the central hearth, where the morning meal is being laid out like a battlefield. The dowry inventory continues in the background. A cousin is counting iron tools with the intensity of a tax collector. Someone else is sniffing a jar of imported honey like it might explode. You're expected to show gratitude, but not greed, pride, but not arrogance, and above all, you must not complain. Even if the fine linen turns out to be goat hair stitched with hope. You sit beside your new spouse, and the seating arrangement alone is a statement. Are you close enough to show unity? Far enough to show modesty? Did you let your mother-in-law sit between you? That's either a sign of respect or a declaration of war, depending on the region. The food arrives: smoked fish, barley bread, and a suspiciously chewy sausage. You chew slowly, aware that every gesture is being watched. Did you serve your spouse first? Did you take the best cut? Did you offer the elder next to you a sip of your ale? These tiny acts are social currency, and you're spending fast. A mainstream historical fact: Viking breakfasts were often communal, with food shared from central platters. Meals weren't just nourishment, they were performances. Your ability to host, share, and subtly assert status was constantly evaluated. And today, you're the star of the show. Someone raises a toast. It's not romantic, it's transactional. May your union bring strong sons and fewer lawsuits. You smile politely. Another toast follows, this one more biting. May your goats be more fertile than your arguments. You laugh, because you're supposed to. But the message is clear. Your marriage is a public affair, and everyone has a stake. You glance at your spouse. They're doing the same dance, smiling, nodding, offering bits of sausage to the toddler who's already dropped 3 on the floor. You're both performing, and the audience is relentless. A fringe tidbit: in some Viking communities, breakfast after the wedding included a ritual tasting of salt and honey, symbolizing the balance of hardship and sweetness in marriage. You're handed a pinch of salt now, and it's not subtle. Someone mutters, "You'll need it." The conversation shifts to livestock. Your father-in-law asks how you plan to manage the sheep. You say something about rotating pastures, and he nods approvingly. Your spouse mentions a plan to reinforce the chicken coop, and suddenly the room is buzzing with advice, warnings, and one story about a rooster that attacked a priest. Historians still argue whether these breakfast interrogations were formal rituals or just deeply ingrained social habits.
Either way, you're being tested. Not just for competence, but for compatibility. Can you work together? Can you disagree without drama? Can you survive a winter with this person and still want to share your ale? You finish your meal. The plates are cleared. The dowry items are double-checked, and someone announces that the couple will now walk the yard. It's not a romantic stroll. It's a symbolic inspection. You and your spouse walk the perimeter of the longhouse, nodding at livestock, checking fences, and pretending you know how to fix a broken cart axle. The elders follow at a distance, murmuring. You hear snippets, "They seem steady. She's got good posture. He didn't flinch at the goat." These are compliments, probably. You return to the hearth, where someone has placed 2 wooden stools side by side. You sit. The room quiets. This is the moment where your marriage becomes official, not just in law, but in lore. From now on, your names will be linked in gossip, in song, and in the occasional passive-aggressive carving on a drinking horn. You're married. You've passed the breakfast test. But don't relax yet. The poetic insults are coming next.
You barely have time to stretch before the next Viking tradition hits you like a snowstorm in spring. Poetic insults. Yes, you heard that right. In this society, teasing wasn't just tolerated, it was ritualized. And now that you've survived the sheet check and breakfast politics, it's time to see how well you handle being roasted in verse. You and your spouse are seated near the hearth, trying to look composed, while a cousin, who's clearly been rehearsing, stands up with a smirk and begins reciting. The poem is clever, biting, and just vague enough to be deniable. Something about your soft hands and goat-like stamina. The crowd chuckles. You smile because you have to, but inside, you're already planning your poetic revenge. This isn't bullying, it's bonding. Viking society prized wit, and the ability to respond with humor or a clever comeback was a sign of strength. You're not just being insulted, you're being initiated. If you can laugh, you belong. A mainstream historical fact. Viking skalds, poets, and storytellers were central to community life. Their verses preserved history, mocked rivals, and celebrated heroes. And yes, they also composed wedding roasts. These weren't just jokes, they were social commentary, often laced with double meanings and sly references to family feuds or past scandals. Your spouse gets their turn next. The poem is gentler, but still sharp, something about eyes like storm clouds and a temper that could sink a ship. They laugh, and the crowd approves. You exchange a glance, half amusement, half, "we're in this together." A fringe tidbit. In some regions, couples were expected to compose a verse about each other during the first week of marriage. Not romantic sonnets, more like playful jabs. Her stew could tame a berserker, but her singing could wake the dead. It's a weird kind of intimacy, but it works. The insults keep coming. A neighbor references your dancing skills like a drunk elk. An elder jokes about your dowry, more bark than bite. You nod, smile, and file each one away for future retaliation. Because in Viking culture, memory was a weapon, and you're already sharpening yours. Historians still argue whether these poetic exchanges were spontaneous or rehearsed.
Some believe they were part of a larger ritual designed to test the couple's resilience and humor. Others think they were just a natural extension of Viking storytelling culture, where every event was an excuse for verse.
Either way, you're surviving. You even manage a comeback. Something about your cousin's beard resembling a mossy fence. The crowd erupts. You've earned a point. But the gossip, that's harder to dodge. As the poems fade, the whispers begin. You hear them as you refill your ale, as you pet a dog, as you pretend to understand the chicken coop schematics. Did you see how she looked at him? I heard he didn't even touch the porridge. They say the sheet was clean. You try not to react. Gossip is the lifeblood of the longhouse. It flows faster than mead and hits harder than a winter wind. You're not just living your life, you're performing it for an audience that never sleeps. You and your spouse retreat to a corner, pretending to discuss firewood. You whisper jokes, share a stolen smile, and agree to fake a disagreement later, just to keep the crowd guessing. It's exhausting, but oddly bonding. You're learning the rhythm of Viking marriage, public, performative, and peppered with poetry. A child runs past, shouting a rhyme about your boots. You laugh. You're adapting. The longhouse settles into its afternoon hum. The fire crackles, the goats bleat, and someone starts composing a new verse about your attempt to milk a cow. You haven't even touched a cow yet, but the legend is already growing. You're part of the story now, and the story never sleeps. You think you've earned a break. You've survived the blood check, the breakfast politics, and a barrage of poetic insults. But as you stretch your legs and glance around the longhouse, reality sets in. There's nowhere to hide. Privacy in Viking society is a luxury reserved for dreams and the occasional forest walk, if you're lucky enough to dodge the goats. You and your spouse share a sleeping platform with two other couples, a toddler who snores like a walrus, and an elderly aunt who mutters saga verses in her sleep. The longhouse is one giant room, divided only by low partitions, hanging furs, and the unspoken rule that you don't comment on someone else's snoring, unless it's poetic. You try to whisper something sweet to your spouse, but a cousin coughs pointedly. You reach for their hand, and someone immediately asks if you're expecting. You blink. It's been 12 hours. A mainstream historical fact. Viking longhouses were communal living spaces, often housing extended families, servants, and livestock. The hearth was central, both physically and socially, and daily life revolved around its warmth and visibility. You weren't just married, you were absorbed into a living organism of kinship, labor, and constant observation. You attempt a private moment near the fire, but a goat wanders over and starts chewing your sleeve. Your spouse swats it away, and someone jokes that you're already fighting. You smile, but your jaw's getting sore from all the smiling. A fringe tidbit?
Some Viking households used carved wooden screens to create semi-private nooks for newlyweds. They weren't soundproof, and they definitely weren't romantic. One surviving example includes a carving of two lovers being interrupted by a chicken. You feel seen. You and your spouse try to coordinate chores. You're assigned to firewood and water hauling. They get laundry and chicken duty. You meet briefly at the well, exchange a soggy kiss, and immediately hear someone shout, "Save it for the bloat!" Historians still argue whether Viking couples ever had true privacy in their first year. Some suggest that newlyweds were given temporary space in a separate building or tent. Others believe the lack of privacy was intentional, a way to ensure transparency, fertility, and social integration. Either way, you're learning to love with an audience. You return to the longhouse with a bundle of wood. Your spouse is wringing out a tunic that smells like fish. You lock eyes. It's not romantic, but it's real. You're building something, slowly, awkwardly, and with a lot of goat interference. At night, you lie side by side on your shared platform. The fire crackles, the toddler kicks you in the ribs, and the aunt starts reciting a saga about a warrior who married a troll. You whisper, "That's us," and your spouse chuckles. You're learning to communicate in glances, gestures, and stolen moments. You pass notes carved into wood chips. You share jokes about the chickens. You invent a secret signal for "I need air." It's a slow dance, and the music is mostly goat bleats and snoring, but it's yours. You wake early the next morning to the sound of someone arguing about turnip storage. You roll over, bump into your spouse, and smile. You're still here, still married, still surviving. And tomorrow, you get to shovel manure together. Romance.
You wake to the scent of damp straw, wood smoke, and something suspiciously manure-adjacent. The longhouse is already humming, children chasing chickens, elders muttering about weather omens, and someone loudly debating the merits of goat cheese versus sheep cheese. You stretch, groan, and realize that today your honeymoon involves a pitchfork. Because in Viking society, chores come before cuddles. You and your spouse are expected to contribute immediately. No lazy mornings, no romantic strolls. You're handed tools, an axe, a bucket, a broom made of twigs, and pointed toward your respective duties. You trudge outside, boots squelching in mud, and begin chopping firewood. Your spouse disappears into the barn, armed with a rake and a look of quiet dread. A mainstream historical fact: Viking households were self-sustaining units, and every member, regardless of age or marital status, was expected to work. Newlyweds weren't exempt. In fact, their productivity was closely watched, especially in the first weeks. A lazy spouse could damage the family's reputation and spark gossip faster than a spilled mead horn. You swing the axe, muscles aching from yesterday's festivities. The wood is stubborn, the air damp, and your audience includes 2 goats and a child who keeps asking if you're strong enough to fight a troll. You smile and say, "Only if the troll's made of turnips." Meanwhile, your spouse is knee-deep in hay and chicken drama. You hear a squawk, a curse, and then laughter. Someone shouts, "They're bonding." You roll your eyes and keep chopping. A fringe tidbit: In some Viking communities, couples were expected to complete a joint task like building a fence or preparing a feast within the first week of marriage. Success meant harmony. Failure meant more poetic insults. You and your spouse have been assigned the task of repairing the grain shed. It leans like a drunken warrior and smells like regret. You meet at the shed after lunch, tools in hand. The structure is held together by hope and old rope. You start hammering, your spouse holds the planks, and together you create something vaguely functional. It's crooked, but it stands. A neighbor nods approvingly. Good enough for winter, they say. You beam like you've won a battle. Historians still argue whether these joint tasks were symbolic or purely practical. Some suggest they were designed to test the couple's ability to cooperate under pressure. Others believe they were simply necessary chores, elevated by tradition. Either way, you're learning to work together, one bent nail at a time. You return to the longhouse covered in sawdust, sweat, and a mysterious stain that might be chicken-related. Your spouse looks equally disheveled. You exchange a glance, equal parts exhaustion and pride. You survived the day. You built a shed. You didn't accidentally set anything on fire. Dinner is simple: barley stew, dried fish, and a slice of bread that could double as a weapon. You eat beside your spouse, sharing quiet jokes and stolen glances. Someone asks if you're tired. You say, "Only in the bones." They nod. That's marriage. You help clean up, sweep the hearth, and tuck the toddler into a pile of furs. The aunt begins another saga, this one about a couple who tamed a sea serpent with teamwork and salted cod. You whisper, "Next week?" Your spouse grins. You lie down, muscles aching, heart steady. You're not in love, not yet, but you're in sync. And in Viking marriage, that's the first step. Tomorrow brings blots and ancestor visits, but tonight, you sleep beside your partner, wrapped in the quiet satisfaction of shared labor. You wake before dawn to the sound of horns, low, mournful, and unmistakably ceremonial. Today is a blot day, and that means ritual, sacrifice, and a whole lot of spiritual scrutiny. You and your spouse exchange a glance that says, "Let's try not to offend any gods before breakfast." Blots are sacred Viking ceremonies meant to honor the gods, ancestors, and forces of nature that shape daily life. And now that you're married, you're expected to participate, not just as individuals, but as a unit. Your bond isn't just social or economic, it's spiritual. And today, you prove it. You dress in your best tunic, which still smells faintly of goat. Your spouse braids their hair with care, adding a small token from their family, a carved bone charm said to bring fertility and favor. You do the same, tucking a bit of amber into your belt. It's not just fashion, it's protection. A mainstream historical fact: Viking blots often involved animal sacrifice, offerings of food and drink, and invocations to deities like Freyr, Thor, and Odin. These rituals were deeply communal, blending religious devotion with social bonding. Newlyweds were expected to offer something meaningful: grain, mead, or even a prized item from their dowry. You arrive at the sacred grove, where the air smells of pine, smoke, and anticipation. Elders chant, children fidget, and someone is already arguing about the proper way to pour mead for Njord.
You and your spouse step forward, holding your offering, a woven basket of dried herbs, honeycomb, and a small carved figure representing your union. The priest accepts it with a nod. You're invited to touch the altar stone together, a gesture symbolizing shared fate. Your fingers brush, and for a moment, the world quiets. You're not just surviving, you're participating. A fringe tidbit. In some regions, couples visited burial mounds after the blot, whispering prayers to ancestors and asking for guidance. You and your spouse are led to a nearby mound where you kneel and place a sprig of juniper. You whisper thanks, hopes, and one slightly awkward joke about not wanting to inherit Uncle Bjorn's temper. Historians still argue whether these ancestor visits were formal rites or personal traditions. Some believe they were essential for legitimizing a marriage within the family line. Others suggest they were optional, reserved for those with strong ties to ancestral land. Either way, you feel the weight of history pressing gently on your shoulders. You return to the longhouse, quiet and reflective. The fire is burning low, and someone's preparing a feast to honor the gods. You help peel turnips, your spouse stirs the stew, and together you create something nourishing. It's not romantic, but it's sacred. During the meal, someone asks what you prayed for. You say, strength. Your spouse says, patience. The room nods. Those are good answers. Later, you're invited to share a story, something about your family, your hopes, or your fears. You tell a tale about your grandmother's stubborn goat and how it once chased a thief into the river. Your spouse adds a detail about the goat learning to open doors. The crowd laughs. You're bonding through myth. You end the day with a quiet walk around the yard. The stars are out, the air is crisp, and the gods, hopefully, are pleased. You hold hands, not for show, but because it feels right. You're not just married, you're woven into the fabric of belief, tradition, and legacy. And tomorrow, you meet the rest of the family. You wake to the sound of boots stomping and someone shouting, "Get dressed, we're going visiting." No, it's not a casual brunch. Today, you and your spouse begin the ceremonial rounds, visiting kin, showing your faces at the market, and proving to the wider community that your marriage is real, functional, and ideally not cursed. You pull on your best tunic again and try to brush the straw out of your hair. Your spouse is already packing a small bundle of gifts, dried fish, woven cloth, and a carved spoon that looks suspiciously like it was borrowed from your wedding feast. You're not just dropping by, you're presenting yourselves as a unit. A mainstream historical fact, Viking newlyweds were expected to visit both sides of the family within the first few weeks of marriage. These visits reinforced alliances, settled lingering dowry questions, and allowed relatives to assess the couple's dynamic. You weren't just saying hello, You were being evaluated. You start with your spouse's kin. The journey is muddy, the cart wheel squeaks, and the goat you borrowed for transport keeps trying to eat your sleeve. You arrive damp, tired, and slightly goat-scented. Perfect. The family greets you with cautious smiles and a barrage of questions. How's the longhouse? Have you argued yet? Did you bring mead? You answer politely, offer your gifts, and try not to flinch when someone asks if you're expecting again. You're invited to sit near the hearth, where the elders begin their subtle interrogation. They watch how you speak to each other, how you share food, how you react when the toddler throws a turnip at your face. You pass the test. Barely. A fringe tidbit, in some regions, newlyweds were expected to participate in a symbolic task during these visits, like helping repair a roof or churn butter. You're handed a bucket and told to prove your worth. You churn with enthusiasm. Your spouse cheers you on. The butter is lumpy, but the family approves.
Historians still argue whether these kin visits were formal obligations or flexible customs. Some suggest they were rooted in legal tradition, especially when land or livestock were involved. Others believe they were more social, designed to reinforce community bonds. Either way, you're learning that marriage is a public performance with very few intermissions. Next stop, the market. You arrive in a bustling square filled with shouting vendors, clucking chickens, and the unmistakable scent of fish stew. You and your spouse walk side by side, trying to look competent and affectionate. You buy a bundle of herbs, trade a wool scarf for a jar of honey, and politely decline a man selling blessed turnips. People recognize you. They nod, smile, and whisper. That's the new couple. She's the one who danced with the goat. He fixed the grain shed. Your reputation is growing, mostly in the right direction. You're invited to join a small circle of traders for a drink. They ask about your plans, your chores, your hopes for children. You answer with practiced grace, and your spouse adds a joke about naming your firstborn after the butter bucket. The crowd laughs. You're winning them over. You leave the market with a pouch of dried apples, a slightly dented ladle, and a growing sense of belonging. You're not just surviving, you're integrating. Back at the longhouse, you unpack your goods, share stories with the family, and collapse beside the hearth. Your spouse leans against you, tired but content. You've faced kin, conquered the market, and avoided turnip-based scandal. Tomorrow brings fertility pressure and herbal brews. But tonight, you rest in the quiet glow of earned approval.
You wake to the sound of someone grinding herbs and humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like a fertility chant. Today, the whispers become louder, the glances more pointed, and the brews more experimental. Welcome to the next phase of Viking marriage, the pressure to produce heirs. You and your spouse are barely out of bed when an elder hands you a steaming cup of something green and gritty. For strength, she says. You sip. It tastes like moss, regret, and possibly fish. Your spouse gets a similar concoction with a wink and a muttered, "May Freyr bless your loins." A mainstream historical fact. Fertility was a central concern in Viking marriage. Children meant labor, legacy, and leverage. A couple's ability to produce offspring was tied to their social value, and rituals, herbs, and even dietary changes were used to encourage conception. You're now part of that tradition, whether you like it or not. You're invited to a small ceremony near the sacred grove. It's not a blot, but a quieter rite focused on fertility and ancestral blessing. You and your spouse are asked to place offerings at a carved stone, a sprig of juniper, a piece of bread, and a small token representing your hopes. You choose a carved acorn. Your spouse chooses a feather. Symbolism is everything. A fringe tidbit. Some Viking women wore amulets shaped like tiny axes or hammers, believed to invoke Thor's strength and fertility. You notice your spouse now wears one too, tucked discreetly into their belt. You smile. It's oddly sweet. Historians still argue whether these fertility rituals were standardized or varied widely by region. Some suggest they were deeply spiritual, tied to seasonal cycles and agricultural rhythms. Others believe they were more performative, driven by social pressure and superstition. Either way, you're drinking a lot of strange tea. Back at the Longhouse, the gossip intensifies. Someone asks if you've picked baby names. Another offers a charm guaranteed to bring twins. You nod politely, trying not to choke on your nettle biscuit. Your spouse whispers, "Let's name the first one Privacy." You laugh, and someone immediately assumes you're pregnant. You're assigned a new chore, tending the herb garden. It's symbolic, of course. You dig, plant, and water alongside your spouse, surrounded by plants with names like wombwort and love's whisper. You find a beetle. Your spouse names it Hope. You're bonding. That night, you're invited to a storytelling circle. The theme? Legendary births. One tale involves a woman who gave birth during a thunderstorm and named her child Lightning. Another features a man who claimed his son was conceived during a bear hunt. You and your spouse exchange amused glances. Your story will probably involve goats. You lie down beside the hearth, stomach full of root stew and herbal tonics. Your spouse curls beside you, warm and quiet. You whisper, "Do you think they'll stop asking?" They whisper back, "Only if we give them something else to gossip about." You're learning to navigate expectation with humor, pressure with patience. You're not just surviving, you're adapting. Tomorrow brings public disputes and community mediation. But tonight, you sleep in the soft hum of shared resilience. You wake to shouting, not angry shouting, more like theatrical bickering with a hint of performance. Two elders are arguing about the proper way to store dried fish, and the entire Longhouse is watching like it's opening night at the Saga Theater. You blink, stretch, and realize today is about conflict. Specifically, how Viking marriages handled it, with full community involvement. You and your spouse have been married long enough to disagree. Maybe it's about chores. Maybe it's about goats. Maybe it's about who left the door open during last night's storm. But in Viking society, conflict isn't hidden. It's aired, examined, and ideally resolved with the help of everyone from your cousin to the local law speaker. A mainstream historical fact, Viking communities practiced open mediation, often involving elders or respected neighbors to settle disputes. Marriage was seen as a social contract, and any tension within it was considered a communal concern. You weren't just arguing with your spouse, you were performing a negotiation for the village. You and your spouse have a minor disagreement about firewood stacking. You prefer neat piles, they prefer functional chaos. An elder overhears and immediately calls for a discussion circle. You're seated near the hearth, handed mugs of ale, and asked to express your feelings. You blink, your spouse smirks, the toddler claps. You explain your preference for order. Your spouse defends their method as efficient under pressure. The crowd murmurs. Someone references a saga where a couple nearly divorced over cheese placement. You're not alone. A fringe tidbit. In some Viking communities, couples were encouraged to resolve disputes through symbolic acts, like exchanging carved tokens or performing a joint task. You're handed a wooden spoon and told to stir the stew together. It's oddly effective. Historians still argue whether these public mediations were formalized or spontaneous. Some suggest they were rooted in legal tradition, tied to property and inheritance. Others believe they were more cultural, designed to reinforce communal bonds and prevent isolation. Either way, you're learning that privacy is optional, but resolution is mandatory. You and your spouse finish stirring the stew. The crowd nods. The elder declares, "Harmony restored." You're handed a slice of bread as a peace offering. You eat it together, laughing quietly. Later, you witness another couple arguing about pig feed. The community gathers, listens, and offers advice. One elder suggests a feeding schedule, another recommends a different breed of pig. The couple nods, thank everyone, and leave with a plan. It's messy, but it works. You and your spouse retreat to the yard, where you stack firewood together, neatly but with a touch of chaos. You're learning to compromise, to communicate, to laugh through tension. That night, someone tells a story about a couple who resolved their feud by building a boat together. You whisper, "Next time we fight, let's build a spoon." Your spouse grins. You lie down beside the hearth, tired but steady. You've faced conflict, embraced community, and found your rhythm. Tomorrow brings storytelling and gift exchanges, but tonight you rest in the quiet strength of shared understanding.
You wake to the scent of pine smoke and the sound of someone tuning a lyre. Today is a storytelling day, and that means sagas, riddles, and the subtle art of gift-giving. You and your spouse are expected to participate, not just as listeners, but as contributors. Because in Viking society, stories weren't just entertainment, they were a currency. You sit near the hearth, wrapped in a fur that still smells faintly of goat. The longhouse is buzzing with anticipation. Elders settle into their carved stools, children gather with wide eyes, and someone passes around a bowl of dried apples. You and your spouse exchange a glance. It's time to share. A mainstream historical fact, storytelling was central to Viking culture.
Sagas preserved history, taught moral lessons, and reinforced social norms. Newlyweds were often expected to share tales about their families, their courtship, or even their wedding mishaps. It was a way to bond with the community and establish identity. You begin with a tale about your wedding feast, the spilled mead, the dancing goat, the cousin who tried to duel a roast chicken. The crowd laughs. Your spouse adds a detail about the sheet check ritual and the aunt who mistook a wine stain for divine intervention. The laughter grows. You're winning them over. A fringe tidbit: in some regions, couples exchanged riddles during storytelling sessions, testing each other's wit and compatibility. You challenge your spouse with one. What walks without legs, sings without breath, and hides in the wind? They pause, smile, and answer, "A whisper." The crowd murmurs approval. Historians still argue whether these storytelling rituals were spontaneous or structured. Some suggest they were tied to seasonal festivals, while others believe they were informal gatherings that evolved into tradition. Either way, you're learning that words have weight, and humor is a powerful tool. After the stories, the gift exchanges begin. You and your spouse present small tokens to key members of the household. A carved comb for the aunt, a pouch of herbs for the cousin, a polished stone for the toddler who keeps calling you goat dancer. These gifts aren't extravagant, but they're meaningful. They say, "We see you, we're part of this." In return, you receive a bundle of wool, a jar of honey, and a small wooden charm shaped like a fox. "For cleverness," the elder says. You smile. Your spouse receives a pair of mittens, slightly mismatched, but warm. "For patience," someone whispers. You retreat to the yard, arms full of gifts, hearts full of stories. You sit beneath a tree, share a dried apple, and laugh about the riddles. You're building something, not just a marriage, but a reputation. That night, the longhouse glows with warmth and laughter. Someone sings a saga about a couple who tamed a sea serpent with riddles and roasted turnips. You whisper, "We could do that." Your spouse replies, "Only if the serpent likes goats." You lie down beside the hearth, surrounded by gifts, stories, and the soft hum of belonging. You're not just surviving, you're thriving. Tomorrow brings seasonal hardships and shared resilience, but tonight you sleep in the gentle echo of laughter and lore.
You wake to the sound of wind howling through the thatch and someone shouting about a missing sheep. The seasons are shifting, and with them come the real tests of Viking marriage: weather, hunger, and livestock drama. You and your spouse are no longer newlyweds in the ceremonial sense. You're partners in survival. The longhouse is colder now. The hearth burns longer. The meals grow heartier, and the chores become relentless. You pull on your thickest tunic, which still smells faintly of smoked fish, and step outside into a world of mud, frost, and the occasional angry goose. A mainstream historical fact:
Viking households faced intense seasonal challenges, especially during winter. Food preservation, livestock care, and structural maintenance were critical. Couples were expected to work together to ensure survival, not just for themselves, but for the entire household. Marriage wasn't a retreat. It was a labor contract with emotional benefits. You and your spouse are assigned to roof repair. The thatch is leaking, the ladder is wobbly, and the wind is doing its best to turn your tools into airborne weapons. You climb, hold, hammer, and shout. Your spouse steadies the ladder, passes you nails, and occasionally throws you a look that says, "If we die, I'm blaming the goose." A fringe tidbit. Some Viking couples marked seasonal milestones with symbolic acts, like burying a token beneath the hearth to anchor the home, or carving runes into the doorframe for protection. You and your spouse carve a small fox into the beam above your sleeping platform. "For cleverness," you whisper, "and for surviving the roof." Historians still argue whether these seasonal rituals were rooted in pagan belief or practical superstition. Some suggest they were tied to agricultural cycles and ancestral traditions. Others believe they were simply ways to cope with the stress of winter. Either way, you're learning that symbolism helps when the roof leaks. Food is tighter now. You help salt fish, dry herbs, and store root vegetables in a pit that smells like ambition and onions. Your spouse invents a stew that includes turnips, dried apples, and something you're pretty sure used to be a mushroom. It's surprisingly good. You name it marriage stew. The livestock are restless, a cow escapes, a chicken lays an egg in your boot, a goat tries to climb the ladder. You and your spouse handle it all together. You laugh, you curse, you invent new saga verses about poultry betrayal. The longhouse echoes with your resilience. One night, a storm hits, the wind screams, the walls creak, and the fire sputters. You and your spouse huddle together, wrapped in furs and quiet determination. You whisper stories, share warmth, and promise to fix the door tomorrow. You're not just surviving, you're enduring. The next morning, the sun returns. The longhouse is damp but intact. The sheep are accounted for. The stew simmers. You and your spouse sit near the hearth, tired but proud. You've faced hardship, shared labor, and found humor in the chaos. You're building something strong, not just a home, but a bond forged in wind, wood, and turnips. Tomorrow brings shared humor and quiet affection. But tonight, you sleep in the soft glow of earned peace. You wake to the gentle sound of your spouse humming while stirring porridge. It's not a saga-worthy moment. No dragons, no divine omens, but it's warm, quiet, and oddly intimate. After weeks of scrutiny, chores, and goat-related chaos, you're discovering the softer side of Viking marriage. Humor, affection, and the kind of companionship that grows in the cracks between tasks. The longhouse is calmer today. The storm is past, the roof is holding, and the chickens are temporarily behaving. You and your spouse share breakfast, lukewarm porridge, a slice of dried apple, and a joke about naming your next stew Odin's Regret. You laugh. It's real, it's shared, and it's yours. A mainstream historical fact, while Viking marriages were primarily practical alliances, they weren't devoid of affection. Archaeological finds include love poems, carved tokens, and shared burial sites, suggesting that emotional bonds did form, often through shared labor and mutual respect. You're living that now, one spoonful at a time. You were assigned to clean the barn together. It's muddy, smelly, and full of surprises. You find a lost mitten, a suspiciously round turnip, and a chicken that refuses to acknowledge your authority. You and your spouse work side by side, trading jokes, teasing each other, and inventing a saga about the barn of eternal stench. A fringe tidbit, some Viking couples created private rituals, like exchanging carved runes, singing together, or sharing a secret nickname. You and your spouse now call each other Turnip and Goat Whisperer. It's ridiculous. It's perfect. Historians still argue whether Viking couples expressed affection openly or reserved it for private moments. Some suggest that public displays were frowned upon, while others believe that humor and subtle gestures were common. Either way, you're finding your rhythm, quiet, playful, and deeply human. You take a break near the stream, washing your hands and splashing each other like children. You sit on a rock, share a piece of bread, and talk about nothing in particular. The sun is out, the air is crisp, and for once, no one is watching. Back at the longhouse, someone notices your laughter and raises an eyebrow. They're getting along. Must be the stew. You smile and stir the pot with extra flair. That evening, you and your spouse help prepare a small feast. You roast root vegetables, bake flatbread, and sneak bites when no one's looking. You invent a song about onions. It's terrible. The toddler loves it. After dinner, you sit near the hearth, wrapped in a shared fur. The aunt begins a saga about a warrior who fell in love with the shield maiden after she saved him from a berserker. You whisper, "I'd save you from a berserker." Your spouse replies, "Only if he's allergic to turnips." You lie down together, tired but content. The fire crackles, the longhouse hums, and your bond feels stronger than ever. You're not just surviving, you're connecting. Tomorrow brings rituals of belonging, but tonight you sleep in the soft warmth of shared laughter and quiet love. You wake to the sound of drums, slow, steady, and ceremonial. Today is a day of belonging, and that means rituals, oaths, and the kind of community bonding that makes you feel like part of something ancient and vast. You and your spouse are no longer just the newlyweds. You're becoming woven into the social fabric of the village. You dress in your best again, yes, the goat-scented tunic, and help your spouse braid their hair with small tokens from your shared chores, a sliver of wood from the grain shed, a dried herb from the stew, and a tiny fox charm from your doorframe carving. These aren't just decorations, they're symbols of your journey. A mainstream historical fact.
Viking communities held seasonal gatherings, festivals, and oath-swearing ceremonies where individuals reaffirmed their roles and relationships. Newlyweds were often expected to participate, offering tokens, pledges, or even small performances to demonstrate their integration. Today, you're doing just that. You begin with a funeral. A distant elder has passed, and the village gathers to honor their life. You and your spouse stand quietly, holding hands as the priest chants and the family places offerings on the pyre. You're not central to the ritual, but your presence matters. You're part of the lineage now, part of the continuity. A fringe tidbit. In some Viking regions, couples were expected to attend funerals together as a sign of unity and respect. It was believed that honoring the dead strengthened the bond of the living. You and your spouse place a sprig of juniper on the pyre. It's small, but meaningful. Historians still argue whether these rituals of belonging were formal obligations or organic customs. Some suggest they were tied to legal status and land rights. Others believe they were emotional rights, designed to foster connection and memory. Either way, you're learning that presence is power. After the funeral, the mood shifts. The drums quicken. It's time for the seasonal festival, a mix of music, food, and oath-swearing. You and your spouse are invited to stand before the elders and declare your intentions, to work, to contribute, to honor the gods and the community. You speak clearly. Your spouse adds a joke about surviving the barn. The crowd laughs. You're in. You're handed a small token, a carved bead representing your place in the village. You wear it proudly, alongside your fox charm and your stew-stained belt. You're building a story, one accessory at a time. The feast begins. You roast meat, pour ale, and dance awkwardly with a cousin who insists on spinning like a windmill. You and your spouse share bites, trade jokes, and invent a saga about the festival of slightly burnt bread. It's a hit. Later, you're invited to join a circle of oath-swearers. These aren't dramatic vows. They're simple promises to help with the harvest, to protect the livestock, to teach the children how not to anger the chickens. You and your spouse swear together, hands clasped, voices steady. You're not just surviving, you're belonging. That night, the longhouse glows with firelight and laughter. You sit near the hearth, surrounded by kin, warmth, and the quiet satisfaction of earned place. You whisper, "We're part of this." Your spouse replies, "Even the chickens like us now." Tomorrow brings first-year conflicts and growth, but tonight, you sleep in the soft embrace of community and continuity.
You wake to the sound of rain tapping the roof and someone muttering about spoiled grain. The honeymoon phase, if you could call it that, is long gone. You and your spouse are deep into the first year of Viking marriage, and that means real conflict, real compromise, and real growth. The rituals are fading, the gossip is quieter, and now it's just you two, figuring out how to live together without accidentally starting a feud over turnip placement. The longhouse is tense today. A cousin broke a tool, the goat escaped again, and someone forgot to salt the fish. You and your spouse are assigned to inventory the food stores,
and it's not going well. The dried apples are molding, the barley's low, and the mead barrel has a suspicious leak. You argue, quietly at first, then louder. You said you checked the seal. You said you'd rotate the apples. A mainstream historical fact. Viking couples often faced intense pressure during their first year, especially as seasonal hardships set in. Food shortages, illness, and interpersonal tension were common. Conflict wasn't a failure, it was expected. What mattered was how you handled it. You storm off to the yard, muttering about apples. Your spouse follows, arms crossed. You argue in the rain, surrounded by chickens who seem personally offended. An elder watches from the doorway, nodding approvingly. "They're learning," she says. A fringe tidbit. Some Viking communities believed that the first major fight between a couple was a rite of passage. Elders would observe, offer advice, and even sometimes stage a mock trial to help resolve the issue. You're spared the trial, but you do get a lecture about apple storage from 3 different relatives. Historians still argue whether these first-year conflicts were ritualized or simply inevitable. Some suggest they were part of a larger social script designed to test and strengthen the bond. Others believe they were just the natural result of 2 people sharing chores, space, and goats. Either way, you're in it now. You and your spouse make up over a shared bowl of stew. You apologize for the apples, they apologize for the seal. You laugh, hug, and agree to blame the goat. It's not romantic, but it's real. You spend the afternoon fixing the mead barrel together. It's sticky, tedious, and oddly satisfying. You invent a saga about the mead of reconciliation. It involves a heroic fox, a cursed apple, and a goat who learns to brew. You tell it to the toddler, who immediately demands a sequel. That evening, you and your spouse sit near the hearth, tired but steady. You talk about the future, about planting more herbs, building a better fence, maybe even raising a child who knows how to store apples. You're not just surviving, you're evolving. You lie down together, wrapped in furs and quiet understanding. The fire crackles, the rain softens, and the longhouse hums with the rhythm of shared life. Tomorrow brings the final reflection on marriage as survival. But tonight, you sleep in the gentle strength of earned trust.
You wake to a quiet morning. The fire's low, the long house is still, and even the chickens seem contemplative. You and your spouse stretch, share a piece of bread, and sit together near the hearth. It's been nearly a year since your wedding, and everything feels different. Not easier, not perfect, but deeper, grounded, real. You're no longer the couple being watched, whispered about, or roasted in verse. You're just part of the rhythm now. Fetching water, mending fences, stirring stew, and occasionally arguing about goat placement. And through it all, you've built something sturdy. Not flashy, not poetic, but strong. A mainstream historical fact: Viking marriages were rarely based on romantic love at the outset. They were alliances, economic, social, and spiritual. But over time, many couples developed deep bonds through shared labor, mutual respect,
and the quiet intimacy of daily survival. You're living proof. You and your spouse spend the morning repairing a tool together. It's mundane, but your hands move in sync. You don't need to speak, you just know. Later, you help a neighbor with a fence, trade herbs at the market, and share a joke about turnips that still makes you laugh. A fringe tidbit: some Viking couples marked their first anniversary with a symbolic act, like planting a tree, carving a shared rune, or offering a joint gift to the gods. You and your spouse carve a small fox into the grain shed. It's crooked, but perfect. For cleverness, you whisper, and for surviving the apples. Historians still argue whether Viking marriages were truly partnerships or simply functional arrangements. Some point to love poems and shared burial sites as evidence of emotional depth. Others emphasize the transactional nature of dowries and alliances. But you know the truth lies somewhere in between. You and your spouse sit together at dusk, watching the fire flicker. You talk about the year, the storms, the chores, the laughter, the fights. You remember the blood check sheet, the breakfast politics, the poetic insults, and the goat who tried to officiate your argument. You laugh. You sigh. You lean into each other. You're not just surviving, you're thriving. Not because everything's perfect, but because you've chosen each other again and again through every turnip, storm, and saga. You lie down together, wrapped in furs and quiet joy. The longhouse hums, the fire glows, and your story continues.
Now, let's wind down together. The fire dims to a soft ember glow, casting gentle shadows across the longhouse walls. You and your spouse breathe in sync, the rhythm of shared sleep settling over you like a warm blanket. Outside, the wind has quieted, and the night air carries only the faint rustle of straw and the distant bleat of a sleepy goat. The longhouse is still. The aunt has stopped reciting sagas. The toddler is finally silent. Even the chickens seem to understand that this moment is sacred. You feel the weight of the year behind you, not heavy, but grounding, like a stone worn smooth by time and care. You think of the rituals, the laughter, the chores, the quiet glances across smoky rooms. You remember the first morning, the blood on the sheet, the awkward breakfast, the poetic insults, and you smile, because through it all you've built something real. Your spouse shifts beside you, murmurs something sleepy and unintelligible. You reach for their hand, and they find yours without opening their eyes. It's a small gesture, but it holds everything. Trust, humor, survival, love. The fire crackles once more, then settles into silence. You close your eyes, wrapped in warmth, memory, and the quiet hum of a life shared. Sleep well, Viking. You've earned it.